So so we should remember this is my every shir of mine says this. And then we have to go further from it. First we have to know what it's about. We should remember the beginning of philosophy. The beginning of philosophy is explained by Plato in the Republic as famously getting out of the cave, the dark cave where you only see shadows. Yeah, remember? The 6th book of the Republic says that human beings are stuck in a cave where they see shadow. Apparently this was like some kind of play that used to go on in ancient Greece where the people would like have shadow presentations. Something like we call now like now we do it with light. But the same idea, where you can't see anything beside, you don't see the thing creating the shadow even, right? You only see the shadow. And the shadow projects an image. That was the ancient way of projection, you know. With modern projection is the same thing. It's basically a movie, right? And they said that the philosopher, and now this shadow is created by the sun, and it's what you're seeing is only how the sun gets differently blocked by different things. And then you think, since you never turn around because you're chained and you don't know how to can't turn around physically, so you think that the shadows are what there is. And then the important thing is that there are intellectuals in the shadow world. In the cave, there are intellectuals. It says there are intellectuals. And the intellectuals are those who can predict the shadows in the best way. Right? If you know how to say all the different shadow games that can be played on this screen in front of you, and you understand them the best, and you probably think that you can even manipulate them somehow, which is really probably an illusion, because it's just prediction. Like if you can predict something, you could also pretend to manipulate it very well, right? Because if I know when it's going to rain, I just have to pick up my hand every time it rains, and then my hand is what causes the rain. But I'm just a bluffer, because I don't predict it. I don't know how to control it. So the people considered the intellectuals in the cave are those that studied, and they probably do need what we call intellectual or cognitive ability, like IQ. You need to have a lot of IQ for that to work, and they have theories and to make sense of how these shadow screen things work. And those are the intellectuals. So that's a very important thing to realize. And now the philosophers are the people who have somehow, it's not really clear, he has a way how, but somehow have gotten out of the cave. And he's climbed out upstairs into the real world where he sees the sun itself. Well, the sun itself is really what philosophy is supposed to be seeing, but he at least sees the real things illuminated by the sun. Children of the sun. And therefore he realizes that everything he's been watching has been like a mushal, right? A shadow. A representation of something that there were not actually real things. And therefore, and this is the important thing, therefore the knowledge of them wasn't real knowledge. So we tend to think, this is very important distinction that you can argue with the metaphysics here, because of this whole mushal is based on certain metaphysics. But it would be very hard to argue with the truth. Sorry. With the concept, with the work that he's trying to get at. In other words, that
this is a non-transcendental
before the transcendental part. In other words, that it's not that there are ununderstanding people or wrong, what we call usually, right? When you have a political debate, there are wrong people and there are right people. There are people which have the correct opinions, or the correct, I'm going to say the word correct opinions, or like know the right things. And there are people that don't know. Sometimes we call those people dumb people. Or another way of saying it, like this is already, you could say you can be a stupid person, like not an intellectual person and have the wrong opinions. Or you could be an intellectual person with the right opinions, right? Or you can be these things are interchangeable. You could be a dumb person with the right opinions. So having a good opinion isn't even connected with being an intellectual, right? And this is all how the world of shadows, the cave world, looks. So we have correct opinions and non-correct opinions. Many people care very much about that. Like, do you understand the shadows correctly? Can you predict the shadows correctly? That's what we call wisdom. That's what we passes for intellect in this world. And passively, if there are intellectuals and non-intellectuals, what passes for intellect or what passes for intellectuals is the people that can somehow convince others better of how their system of shadows is the correct one, right? So both, let's be very clear, both the correct opinion and non-correct opinion seems to be very cheap. Seems to be like all, and this is what most people, you could talk about Ashkafa, or talk about politics, or talk about Amuna, any of these things that boil down to having the correct opinions. And people go around saying, so, a stupid, for example, right? If a stupid person, meaning a person with no, not stupid in the sense of wrong, right? Stupid in the sense of someone with no cognitive ability, no ability to grasp something slightly over complex or slightly abstract, or like the second if of a sentence, conditional thinking, or whatever, basic ways of testing cognitive ability. That has very little to do with having true opinions. Because if you happen to be born into the right family, or you happen to listen to the right, how do they call them? Pundits, opinion makers. There's people whose job is to give other people the correct opinions, or the right mashgiach, the right guy that gives you ashkafa, then you have the correct opinion. And if you're very smart, but you happen to have not been exposed to those so-called arguments, or to those so-called presentations, or stories, or rhetoric, or whatever it is, then you have the wrong opinion. So that's one way in which, and it's important to notice, this is what the world runs on, like people having the correct opinions. And very weirdly, intellect, and even the kind of intellect that's talked about, like we have intellectuals, like whatever is an intellectual supposedly, that he's not doing, fundamentally he's not doing anything different than the stupid people are doing. In other words, they have opinions about what the politician you should vote for, and he does too. He just has better ones. Not better ones. They're not essentially better ones. He has better ways of forcing other people to admit that he's saying something. Like other people just scream, and he also has these complicated tools called arguments or debates or don't ask me what, rhetoric, all kind of ways of convincing other people to have the correct opinions. But fundamentally, they're correct opinions. And this is why, in the world of correct opinions, there isn't any real intellectuals. Because there are intellectuals, but they're only interested in either in having, finding the arguments or the proofs for what they want, for what they think the correct opinion should be, or convincing other people. Now, the first insight of thought, of philosophy, is that opinion and thought are not the same thing. Correct thought, we see, not being wrong. Philosophy is not about being less wrong, unlike what Mr. Yitzchok thinks. It's not about being less wrong. Being less wrong is what any human being should want to be. Nothing to do with philosophy. That's normal. That you're still living in your cave. Now, of course, how do I know you're in a cave? Good question. But that's the basic insight that starts all of this. That, in other words, you could say something like this. And this is how I often think of it, although it's probably not a good argument. It's something like this. It doesn't make sense that the intellectuals and the stupid people should be playing in the same sandbox. If they are, then probably it's a waste of time. I mean, why? It's like we're raising the prices for things way too much. Why would we have to write books and arguments if we could all just be dumb and listen to whoever screams the loudest? Might as well.
I mean, does it have to be mutually exclusive?
Meaning?
Just because it interests the dumb people doesn't mean that it's not important to.
Not of interest. The dumb people could be right, and they could have the same kind of connection with the correct,
right.
with what we call the truth in this world, with the correct opinion, as the smart people. Besides, for the smart person, being able to win more debates, because I never didn't go to debate school, so I don't know how to win debates. But I'm right. I'm going to cheer for him, and like democracy works like this, right? I'm going to vote for him, and my opinion is worth just as much, right?
Right. The question
You're
is,
entitled to your opinion.
all the opinions. Let's say guy A tells guy B all the opinions, and guy B believes all of them. Is he any worse than or better than A?
Right. And the basic,
all the
right,
arguments.
exactly. Or maybe they're for worse reasons, but who cares what the reasons are? That's one way. I don't think it's the best way, but one way that I say this, and at least one way to show the difference between what the world of correct opinions is about and what the world of philosophy is about, is that in the world of correct opinions, experts are just people with access to more information, things like that. Okay, if you have a better computer, you have access to more information, you have more accurate, I've been there and someone told me and so on, but there is nothing inherently valuable in...
Doctor and patient are equally healthy or unhealthy.
Yeah, something like that. That's already too many words to explain it. There's nothing inherently valuable in being a smart person in this world. And smart people are tools, right? They work for a certain goal, a certain agenda, a certain party, literally usually, right? Most of the smart people, in a certain aspect of the world at least, literally work for people who want them to get who want the world to be a certain way or to want to do a certain politics.
Isn't that valuable in itself?
Isn't what valuable in itself?
Meaning having the ability to influence.
Yeah, that's valuable in the sense of honor, in the sense of politics, in the sense of looking for, if the goal is to be the one that influences the most people. Yes, that's a nice goal. That's a goal. That is the goal. It's I don't even know if it's illegitimate, but that's the goal. But that the goal of wisdom, or even living rightly, right, or true knowledge, isn't the goal of having the most influence or the most power, right? And therefore, the people, the kind of human being who is trying to be a person of wisdom or a lover of wisdom, right? Not a seller of wisdom, like Plato said, not a sophist but a philosophist, philosopher, right? There must be, and this is what sort of leads Plato to the whole Platonism thing, but there must be I'm trying to go a step before that. There is a real difference, and I think you could notice it by seeing the people and the kind of things they do and the kind of discussions they have and the kind of openness they have. There must be a qualitatively different kind of thing to be done or to discover, try to be in access with, in connection with, when you're doing thought versus when you're having the correct opinions. And this is what I'm saying. It's not about being more right or less wrong. It's about having something entirely different. There's a different thing, and that's why Plato says, with all his complicated ways, that there must be a real, so-called a real world. I don't like the word world, and Plato didn't like the word world. But there must be a reality which the smart person, the wisdom-loving person is accessing or trying to access, which is knowable and not opinionable, right? So he said it has true being, it actually exists, and everything else exists in the same way that correct opinions exist. Like maybe it's true today, but not true tomorrow, or maybe it's conditionally true, or maybe it's, what he would say, it's a reflection, it has some connection with the truth, but it's not the truth. And what we're trying to do by distinguishing correct opinion from thought, from knowledge, is trying to move away from having the correct opinions and into knowing things, knowing anything. Now, it's possible that it's very hard to know anything at all, but at least we can notice, we can try to understand what this even means. And I'm going back to where we started. It seems to be very important. In other words, there's something like this. Maybe an example that makes sense to me. The greatest and most correct opinion piece writer seems to me, very obviously, it's kind of intuitive to me, but maybe because of some kind of education that I have, that they're doing something worse, something qualitatively, right? Something of a different kind than the smallest student of thought, right? In other words, there's this guy, and this is something that people like me and people that, if we start thinking in philosophical ways, there's philosophical traditions that have different ways of thinking. But if you start thinking, like my daughter starts to call me and says, Tati, my teacher talked about energy, and we're not sure if energy is a thing or a concept. I'm like, okay, what is a thing and what is a concept? Well, I don't even know what I'm saying, so start to define your words. And then we start thinking for 5 minutes in the trained philosophical ways, like, okay, maybe a concept is something that exists only in your mind. and the real thing is something that exists outside your mind. Does that make things simpler? Does it make things more complicated? And most normal people, after 5 minutes of doing this, say, oh well, so then we can't know anything. So we're all just playing with words. That's what the sophomore 5-minute philosophy class often teaches people. So this whole method is worthless because and it's true. Because why is it worthless? Because it's teaching you that, and then contrary to that, you go to the next guy, right? If you go to the next class, to the guy who's giving you his political rant or his opinions, his correct opinions, and he knows a lot of stuff. Tons of stuff. And he even knows how many 675 ways how the other guy is wrong. That's how many stuff he knows. That's all of the stuff he knows, by the way. And he knows a ton. He knows how to solve the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. He knows how to solve the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. He even knows the 600-700-year history of each. And some of them might even know the theology of each and the philosophy of each. And how it's Merimaz and Parshas Lech Lecha. And if the war happened to be in Parshas Shoftim, it would be Merimaz and Parshas Shoftim. He knows a ton of stuff. Or say he has a ton of correct opinions, or correct according to him opinions. And people very often buy that one more than this one. Because this is one where you go like, well, what is true? And this is like, what is truth anyways? Or we have to start in such basic, elementary facts where you like, very quickly either turn into a real philosopher or turn into a nihilist. Like 5-minute discussions. And then somehow, and this is something like, I'm trying to like, to sharpen a certain image. Somehow the classroom next door where the guy has an opinions on everything under the sun seems to be doing much better, being much more productive. Right? Productive in the knowledge sense, right? He has a lot more books to write. And
does that lead to an opinion? It's a question. Is philosophy...
Okay, wait. It might lead... no. So what I'm trying to get at is that the guy with all of these things to say, and I think this is a fact, right? The few philosophers are still arguing over the like basic definition of reality, which they've been doing since Socrates' times, or probably earlier. And the other guys have in between written books and created empires and destroyed empires, and I mean, and you could say that thing from the Jews, like the Jews in the sense of the, like I said last week, that we're the true philosophers. Remember Al Mashir? The Jews are still thinking of a cliché as mevashel for a very long time. Or other totally irrelevant questions of like, does a shlishi letuma make a fourth one, and so on. And this is, I think this is a real question, and we have to we can again, and like you say, so you want to know if the philosopher is trying to get at more true opinions, right? The other guy is just speaking out of his whatever. And we're trying to really be correct. And I feel like the problem with saying that is that it's not true. The problem with saying all the things I don't agree with. The problem is that if that's the goal, like if the goal of philosophy is to have more correct opinions, like be less wrong, then it's doing an awfully bad job at it. One, because firstly, it seems to be useless almost to that purpose, almost useless in the sense of the philosophers are not writing very good political works. Even when they started trying, whatever, don't ask me what kind of mess they made. Whatever. No, not the Republic. And secondly, I mean, because, yeah, the actual people, I mean, you could say they didn't build up their basic epistemology or metaphysics up to that level, but it seems like there seems to be a real problem. Like I don't think after, this is not a nice, again this is a dumb way of saying it, but after 3,000 years of these like groups of people competing, at some point you have to say, well no, this is not what it's good for. People, I know of people that are claiming this, like maybe Talmud is better at winning wars than whatever it is they study in West Point. It's not. We've been doing Talmud for a long time, and they've been doing war. The Romans have had war academies for a long time, and they do better. If the question is how to win wars, you should not study it in Masechtas Gittin or in Masechtas Saita, which talks about the laws of war. To be very clear, how do I know? Well, theoretically, this would, true socialism has never been tried and all of that. But in reality, which is like where we start, the people who've done that I would have to say they've been doing a good job of something, but they've not been doing a good job of that. Right? And the same way that people who've studied certain philosophy, what I call philosophy here, like basic questions of what reality is, which is not limited to people who read philosophy books. They've done a good job at something, but it's definitely not at voting for the right candidate. You could also see them always voting for stupid, wrong candidates. But also, when they're voting for the right candidates, they don't seem to be doing it any better than anyone else. I don't think there's evidence for that. And if there is, it's awfully obscure and like hiding in some like, like it's 54% versus 53% something.
So subject to a lot of like.
Well, you also have to know what the correct opinions are to decide this question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. And it's also subject to interference. You can assume that, let's say, this candidate embodies your, let's say, vision of
and you're
the
wrong.
Political world, and just be missing a detail, or not know this guy's true intention.
Yes. So that means that your philosophy. I think that Martin Heidegger was a great philosopher. He might have been messed up, but he was a great philosopher. He was trying to do real philosophy.
Who?
Martin Heidegger was trying to be a real philosopher, at least talked about it. You could always say he's a scam. I think again that's too easy to say. And was a Nazi. I personally don't think the Nazis are a good political party, although maybe if I would be a German, I would have thought differently. But it seems to be wrong. And so on. That's just the famous example. And I think it would be bad to say that, okay, so either to say, okay, so philosophy is useless, or to say that, what was the other side? I say that it's evil. Another thing you could say. Both of these things seem wrong, or all of these options seem wrong. So what it seems to me, at least if there's a room for any of this thing, which we call study, it's going back to what Plato said, it starts at least. Where it should end, okay, you could say, but it at least starts in having it, like Plato would say, it has a different subject matter. It's not studying the same thing. We are not, the idea of being a wisdom or true knowledge is not studying the same things as the opinion people are even studying. And they have to be very clear about this. We're not studying the same things. It's a different subject matter. Or at least it's trying to do things in an entirely different way, to the extent that it's a different kind of that's why we say it's not opinion we're trying to looking for. We're looking for something called thought.
So you're basically saying that opinion people are not even going
wrong.
They're not even going in the direction of thought.
Yes, they're not even wrong. Well, the weird thing, they're not even that. That's why I'm saying this as a kind of judgment on the kind of person they are. I just don't like them. All of them, even the right ones, even the ones that I enjoy listening to because they're entertaining and so on. I just don't think, doesn't strike me. It's something very simple. This doesn't seem to be a good way to spend your life. I mean, maybe it might be useful, might be important. If it's important, we should survive. We need something to convince some other people to buy us rockets, whatever. All of those things are important and valuable, but not honorable, like the Greeks used to say.
I agree. I just don't understand why philosophy. I know to me it's a little bit of a puzzle.
The word philosophy is just overused here.
Lead to, at least in some sense, correct opinions.
Because it should be a kal v'chomer. If you know about how the heavens look, you should definitely know who to vote for.
No, I don't think so. But if you study about whether or not a right is holding a baby, if you can kill the baby, I don't know. That can teach you things about.
I think that moral philosophy is also a failure. In the sense that it's taught nowadays for sure. Meaning to say...
Gemara morality.
Yeah, Gemara is an ethical philosophy. I do think that it fails when it comes to practical questions also, yes. That's why we have all these classes about Ilchas Milchama and things like that. It's good if you want to talk about... maybe I'm declaring defeat too quickly, right? So your question is, I think if we say there's a different, let's try to get, there's a different one, it's a different discipline, it's a different activity, right? That's one way of saying it. I think that's better than saying it's a different subject matter because that's already a metaphysical commitment. No, there's a different philosophy, thought. Take all the word philosophy because that's like a brand name belonging, there's someone that sells perfume by that name. Nah, not the point. Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Thought. and it strikes me as correct. Like I was reading Leonard Cohen's, like, guy has a book of interviews when he, like, people ask him, sometimes there's political opinions. He says, my opinions are boring. I could give you poems, I can't give you opinions. Like, I'm not good at opinions. I'm good at something else. And this is a very serious insight. He's more of a poet than a philosopher, but it's trying to get at something too. Like opinions, yeah, I think that the Quebec should secede from Canada today, tomorrow I think differently, whatever. He has opinions. But why, he says I find my opinion so boring. You want me to tell you? And this is, you should notice this. You have all these interviews with celebrities, and even, like, not only guys know how to think, why would he even know how to think? That's obvious. But even, let's say, a guy that does know, like, you go to the Rosh Hashiva, he knows how to learn Gemara, he should know how to vote. Why would he know? And obviously, usually when he knows, he doesn't know. Like, they have a very bad record of having good opinions. Not even, again, my problem is not they're wrong, maybe they're right, but they just seem to be uninteresting. They seem to be doing nothing for all the philosophy that the professor of philosophy studied doesn't seem to help him at all in these kind of questions. So therefore, again, one conclusion could be that we should close down the humanities departments because they're doing a bad job of teaching people to vote for the correct guy, which is some people's conclusion. But that seems to be dumb also, just because it doesn't seem to be answering to what the guy is actually saying. Or if he's saying something interesting, if he's just promoting a different opinion, then yeah, 100%. Then you're just having a fight with him. But to the extent that there's something real, and I think there's something real, it's not about having the correct politics or the correct opinions at all. And therefore, the same thing, like, I could say something in the religious arena where I'm more familiar, right? You say, like, all the people that read Moreh Nevuchim turn out to have worse hashkafas. Well, maybe they were not aiming at having hashkafas at all. How about that? Maybe they were trying to think, and thought, of course, is, yes, like I say, inherently more open. It starts at much more base. It knows much less things than you know. Like Socrates said, I know so little things, and I'm such a philosopher. You know, it knows way less things, and that's why it seems useless to you. But also is trying to do something different. So, you know, that's why all right, and I did classes about this, right? If you ask me for, like, what my emunah is, whatever, I believe whatever I have to believe, no problem. Because that seems to be easy. Everyone is doing it. Why shouldn't I be doing it? But if you ask me what I think, then I have to start from zero. That's a whole different question.
So,
and also, what I think is not about me giving you, okay, what I have an opinion today. That's dumb. I could think with you, and thinking is an activity. We have to do it.
Okay, so class.
Yeah, sure.
Wait, so why can't we have, just like, use that analogy of Leonard Cohen, right? So there's room for everybody. There's room, not just room. It's necessary to have everybody. So you need the opinion people. You need like a mathematician brings. He understands things, and he really comes up with these theories. And the lesser guys take those theories and put it into motion, right? And they build things, and they use that. The same thing. Philosophers philosophize. They come up with ideas. Then the opinion people use that framework
but I think that in some sense, opinions don't really belong to the people who have them, like in a way that thought does, right? So maybe opinions are interesting, maybe meaningful, but it's not really. When people say it's my opinion,
yes,
and
no,
what someone else's true opinion is. I don't know if that to me is a little boring.
But that's
the opinion is not yours. The opinion is just something else that you participate in. You don't have a connection to it, really.
Okay.
I built this thing.
Oh, but he's saying something. I hear.
I use a form of math to build this. You know. Now I have something substantial. Now I have a substantial.
So listen.
Yeah,
so yes. So for two things, if there's one question you're asking is, why am I hacking on other people? Why did I just say this is different? Well, firstly, yes. Like the first job that I need, that we like this little cult is philosophers believes is that these are different. Like I say, there are different activities. If you're real philosophy, you should probably also believe that they have different subject matters, because otherwise, at least thinking platonically, Aristotelian, like thinking with the ancient tradition, it doesn't make sense for a different activity to have the same subject matter. But anyways, we know that from my other classes.
Right.
But it's a different activity. And if we buy this distinction, like one person, like we're in the business of thought, and you're in the business of opinion, then I already like bought most of what I'm looking to sell. Like you already bought most of what I'm selling. The reason why I set myself up in a position to the opinion makers is because they don't usually acknowledge this. And again, like it seems to be true in the context where, in the religious context that I know well, and I don't know about the political context. Not interested right now even about it, because the whole thing.
Some don't.
No, yes, exactly. So the ones that I'm fighting with are the ones that don't, and in general, there's also deep philosophical and metaphysical issues that lead people to not agree with that. They don't, in the sense of that most of the time, the guy holding the gates to the cave is a correct opinion enforcer guy, very often. And therefore, when my saying that I'm not in your business at all, well, it's also a way to like get over him, like I'm not even fighting with you, but I'm fighting with you in the sense that you're claiming my title. I'm not. If you agree that it's not my title, then we have to get to the second part, which is if there couldn't be like such a division of labor where the philosophers figure out the truth and then they sell it to other people. That was a positive division, the Muslim philosophers all believed in that. But the Rambam's Rebbe's, they all believed in something like that. And Plato discusses that, when the philosopher going back into the cave. This is a question. But firstly, I have to agree that there's two different subjects, two different activities, and that we're not in a fight even. And that's actually why getting involved in debates, in those kinds of debates, are a waste of time for someone interested in thought. Like you say, it's so dumb it's dumb on many levels, most of the times, but it's even dumber that it's not even trying to do anything that has any hope of arriving at thought. Because it's like driving down the wrong highway. And I think mostly the reason I say I'm driving on a different highway is because it doesn't fulfill the basic conditions of questioning that thought has to fulfill. Right? Not enough things are actually open in those discussions. And the people, it's not a discussion, the people are not open to that, and to be open to that is a scary business and a dangerous business, and should be studied only when you're 40 and you've read the whole Shas or whatever. But I don't know if now the other thing, and I'm gonna go.
Is that like just a stalling attempt?
Yeah.
It's a stalling attempt, right?
What, the knowing the whole Shas?
Yeah. Like it's just like pushing it down the line. By that time, they already have kids. You can't really believe.
Yeah, but I teach my students and my children what the Satmar Rebbe said, that those things were written to save the dumb people from themselves. That the Satmar Rebbe said that there was like this machlokas where the Rambam says his stuff, and then other people say, well, you're not allowed to say that, and the Satmar Rebbe goes, well, the Rambam himself wrote that he knows that what he writes can hurt 1,000 dumb people, or they can hurt him. Depends on how you read that sentence. But anyways, but he's doing it for the one smart person. So the Satmar Rebbe says, oh great, so the Rambam is there for the one smart person, and those people arguing with him, they're helping the 1,000 dumb people. Now everyone is solved. So anyways, all these, that's just politics. In truth, for the second point, which is, can there be a stage where there is like the people finding out the truth in a true way, and then sort of teaching that to their children or teaching that to other people, which will let's say implement it or things like that. I think that's at least something that needs qualification. And it needs qualification firstly for the practical reason. Practically, and this is where I am, I can't say, and this is like my crazy belief, having the need to say something that can be plugged into a practical program is already too much of a limitation. Right, so for example, I'll give you a not science example, a philosophy of nature example, right, known as physics. The Rambam said that, the Rambam and Plato, he quotes Plato about this, said that physics is a dangerous discipline and should not be studied only if you're 40 and have learned everything else. And mostly it means to say that you're not going to understand it because you need all the preparatory sciences and so on. And many Jews have been unhappy with this because they said, well, the Chachamim talked about Masa Bereshis, which is this great spooky thing, and you're telling us that it's just Aristotelian physics, and they teach it in the university in my neighborhood, and that doesn't seem to be a good reason to hide it. Like you're claiming that it's the secret of the Torah, but there's nothing. Why would you hide it? So fast forward a few hundred years, seems to me that it's obvious why it should be hidden. Because some people, hello. Hello. Take a chair. You want this one? This one. We're saying what are we saying? This shir is about how opinions are bad. All of them. Even the good ones, even the correct ones. But somehow, at some point, how did I get into this? I might be going a little off track. But anyways, and we were saying that, yeah, I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. Point is, we're in the middle of saying that, so there was this idea, and the Rambam didn't invent it, but he was attacked in the Jewish context for saying this, that there's a big secret known as the nature of the world, how the world really works, and it should not be taught to anyone. It has to be hidden. And people have laughed at this idea for a long time, but that's because those people didn't realize. Now, people say, well, you're laughing at it because it's dangerous religiously, for the laws. People start understanding how nature works, they stop believing in God, and things like that, which is true, but also dumb. The real thing is that all of those people, it's also true, but I don't think it's the only thing. And maybe something that I didn't even think about. The reality, and as anyone that knows about the 20th and probably earlier centuries knows, is that knowing how the world works in the basic sense is an extremely dangerous business. You know, most alchemists died from mercury poisoning, right? Yeah, it's a thing. And it turns out that mercury does have some interesting properties. They were not entirely crazy for being obsessed with it, but also it makes you a little crazy. And also you can get poisoning from it. And playing with that with alchemy is basically, early physics, playing with the basic ingredients of physical reality. And turns out that it's actually a dangerous business for your body and for your mind. And turns out that knowing how atoms work can kill bunches of cities and can either stabilize or destabilize the world depending on which week you're in. But it seems to be actually a dangerous thing for civilization. So it doesn't seem to be crazy at all to say that the study of basic physics should be restricted. Now, okay, so that's for the political side of things, right? For why knowledge can be dangerous. But now that's practical knowledge, right? That's when you take something that you know and you try to apply it. But imagine, and assuming that all knowledge is for itself at least good. Imagine that all people ever discussing physics would be laboring under the mushroom cloud of Hiroshima. That would be a very bad way to do physics. Not because it's not true, that it somehow leads to that, but because that is subjugating the truth to politics. Politics in the good sense. Maybe you should not drop bombs on people. I don't know. Maybe you should. Whichever way, it doesn't matter. It's still, and this is something very weird. Like, what I'm saying is that even assuming, and I don't know if this is true. I mean, like I'm saying, for physics, the connection between technology and basic science is still not as close as most pro-technology people pretend. But assuming that there is a very simple connection, and in some contexts it's famously been very close, from discovering general relativity to creating an atom bomb only took less than 2 decades. Even in those cases, it would have probably not been a good idea for the goal of understanding how the world works, to be always, okay, and therefore we will be able to win over the Nazis in World War II.
Well, the question
it's probably, firstly, you probably shouldn't have done it if you would have known that, or maybe you should have done it a little earlier and then have the wrong side win, or whatever. But secondly, it seems to be a great distraction, and it seems to put huge constraints over thought, which needs to be, for it to work, needs to have only one goal, which is to understand. Does that make sense? This is why in the Enlightenment, in the early modern period, every interesting thinker was hyper obsessed with this thing called freedom of thought. And they're not crazy for it. I mean, politically, it's whatever it is, but philosophically, you can't think at all without freedom of thought. It's not like like in the world of opinions, there's two things. Like I could have the correct opinions, and I can express them, and I could not express them. Yeah, and I could, freedom of thought is anyways a weird thing because there's no police literally in the thought. But it makes sense to have this discussion about freedom of speech. But if you're a philosopher and if you're interested in discovering how the world works, and you think it's not been discovered yet, very basic condition to doing philosophy, to believe that nobody else has ever known anything. Well, not literally, but to believe that it's still worth thinking. Right? Another difference between thought and opinion is that thought is not finished, because the thought we're talking about is an activity. An opinion is sort of the opposite of an activity. Maybe there's an activity of having opinions or voting for the guy, but there's no real activity associated with forming that opinion. Because it's like buying it in the store. You go to the store, and whoever convinces you, you buy it, and then sometimes it comes along with the tools to convince others too, and so on. But it's not like there's a looser association between having the opinion and getting it. That's very interesting. And the thought that we're thinking of is something where the getting the thought and thinking the thought are almost the same thing.
Well, thought is also always limited by context.
In other words, not sure what you mean. It's not about having, like I'm saying, it's not about being more right and less wrong. It's about thinking, which is doing a kind of thing that's different than being more right and less wrong. And thinking totally doesn't care about the consequences. Because consequences belong to someone else to worry about. Or to a different aspect of reality, or a different aspect of humanity. And that's why this is like a very strange answer to what you said, or like maybe there is some practical value in knowing the truth. Well, I'm sure there is. Not only I'm sure there is value in for the thinking person himself. But I also think that talking about that is not a good idea, or focusing on that, because it seems to focus too much on the halacha l'maaseh, what do I get out of it, and it seems to also ruin the thoughts.
But also,
because thought needs more freedom than that, and it needs freedom from evil too. In other words, freedom from the bad consequences of what your thoughts are. You have to worry about that tomorrow. Maybe keep it a secret. I'm not even talking not talking about saying everything, but Kant was very happy with no freedom of speech, only freedom of thought. You have to give allegiance to the king, no problem. But we could say whatever we want in our university classes. But it needs a lot more. That's why it's not. And the experience of people thinking under political pressures, in the sense of trying to really be thinkers, has also not been a good experience. It's been tried.
But the other thing is with thought is that it's automatically narrowed or made circumstantial once you. So let's say I'm a moral philosopher. If you call that person a philosopher, and I come up with, let's say, a perfect theory of if somebody hits me, how many times I can hit them back. But once somebody actually hits me, I have to take into account whether or not they're a sibling or a friend or something like that.
Okay.
Right. So pure thought is always going to be diluted, or you can't control the variables once you apply it to a practical scenario either. So
that makes it useless.
I'm saying if you're a politician or a political pundit or something, you're trying to trying to discuss all the variables and not the actual case itself. It's different in that sense, right? If I'm discussing who whatever, I'm trying to, and I think philosophers that try to do politics try to explain why a lot of the circumstances that other people see as important are actually not important, because it boils down to a core philosophical idea.
And that is correct or incorrect?
I think the philosophers do make good to reach what I'm getting at is I think sometimes philosophers can be better politicians in certain circumstances because they can sometimes maybe pierce through some of the noise.
So the problem that I have with people doing this is that they're usually wrong.
Right, because it's very hard.
No, not because it's very hard. No. Because being someone with good basic ideas, assuming that that's something closer to what we're aiming at, it doesn't give you any advantage in ascertaining the relevance of those ideas, or even in, you say, cutting through a bunch of
right. You might get stuck still at
details that are irrelevant.
Let's say you discovered the problem with a lot of political arguments is that somebody then comes with something. Well, did you know that 20 years before that this guy did this and this and that, which kind of tries to upend the whole argument, and I just happen not to have been aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also history. It seems these kind of problems is why I try to think that maybe there's some science of doing that, or some people that are good at. Probably close the door. No, this the front door. No, this.
No, but I understand. Right, that's definitely a limiting factor. But I still think that.
Yeah, close this door. Might be.
You know.
Yeah, just close.
A philosophy, you know.
There is not so. It seems to me that.
I don't know. It's not like I mean, physicists are you know a certain kind of philosopher that you know don't always make their. I mean, there's two different degrees, right? You get one in physics and applied physics. I think they're different degrees. In
Right,
physics.
and.
But I still think that a physician, not a doctor, but
Do the
can apply.
theoretical physics people have any advantage in solving practical applied physics problems?
That's right. I think that they do.
They probably like to claim that they do, but I'm trying to say that they shouldn't claim that they do because they're probably worse
They
at
may
it.
be poisoning their physics, but I don't think that they're necessarily. I think if it's
It's only
appropriate.
emotional this, but I'm
I think
assuming
if it's
that
appropriately an afterthought. I don't know.
I don't. I'm,
Programming is always the
I'm assuming that they're worse at it.
Right.
I'm assuming that they're worse at it, and
there's
most.
conflicts,
The
too.
big divide.
Essentially saying there's no
Yeah, it's true in physics also.
good
Applied-
answer to this.
Saying engineers
Christians are bad,
aren't
philosophers are bad.
No, my answer is that people should be good.
Oh, you're
It's very hard.
That-
It's very hard to be good at all for a human being. And it's twice as hard to be good at two things. So if you think you're good at anything, or you're going to, how do you call it? Or you're going to dedicate your life to anything, which is another way of saying you're being good at something, right? I'm trying to speak very practically here. If you think you're good at anything, or if you want to be good at anything. Now, wanting to be good at anything, which is what we should be doing with our lives, right? You're trying to be good at something, right? Virtue, remember? Being good at something is a virtue. That's what virtue means. Being good at something. Excellent. Arete. If you want to be good at something, which is another word, so this is a very practical halacha class today. Not solving the problems of the world at all. Just saying all the problems that we're not solving, as usual. If you want to be good at something, which is another word for saying, it's another word for saying cutting yourself off from other things. Because being limited humans, it's not possible for us to do two things at once, or consequently. Can't even do two things one after the other. Well, in the sense of a human life being something to be done, and different kinds of human lives being available to be done. You could have Gilgal in the next life do something different. I don't know. Most people don't do more than one thing well in their life. And the interesting people that you read about in history books are the ones who somehow, well, the guy that's writing their biography always tries to show how their whole life was building up to that one good thing that they ever did. And since then it's all been a decline, you know. Anyways, the point is, we don't have enough time to do everything or to be good at everything. A very important realization. Which is another way of saying that dedicating yourself to excellence means deciding to be good at some things and not at others. I think that's a very basic thought. And it's very sad because, especially when you're young, you want to be good at everything. And you should want to be good at everything. But you should want to be good at the best thing, which is almost as good as being good at everything, but not the same. Right? We should figure out what the best thing at being good at is, and then you're being a good human being, right? The best at the best thing. You should be good at the best thing. But good at everything is useless. Like, you know, you could be a lot of things, but not everything, and not really more than one or two things. So therefore, do you agree with my thought? It's hard to be good at two things. You know, people that do two things in their life.
It's hard to be good at one thing. I don't know if it's necessarily twice as hard to be good at two things.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's more than twice as
The
hard.
general idea is definitely.
Well, much less than infinite amount of things, which seems to be the possibility, right? Maybe it's six things, you know, maybe I'm exaggerating, and it's really six things.
I think
Okay.
it's more than twice as hard to be good at two things than it is to be good at one thing.
Yeah, but it would be infinitely more hard to be good at 11 things.
So I think it's just 12 times as hard.
No, at some point it's like you hit the limits of humanity.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah, but I don't know if two is the magic number.
Okay, I'm saying one. Maybe one is an exaggeration. But for choosing, you have to choose one, at least for a day, for a minute, I mean, something.
And a good philosopher, maybe.
Now we know it is not true.
It's you can be good at something.
Maybe
Yeah, okay, there's levels, you know, like jack of all trade, a master of none. Yeah, it's a problem. So because of this, I think that this is, you know, people talk about moral dilemmas and things like that. All human dilemmas boil down to the fact that we're limited and we can only be good at one thing. And many of the confusions that we have boil down to us not liking to accept that.
No, we have no just one thing. Because once you have to dedicate yourself, you have to know.
Well, if you very clearly, the thing is that whichever one is the correct one, the other one is going to suffer. Whichever one. If the people on one side of the border are going to win, the people on the other side are going to lose. I know that in Mashiach times they'll both win, but not in. That's again thinking in God, like thinking that you're God. But before that, they must, and sometimes maybe if things are irrelevant, it's a waste of time to choose sides. But sometimes you're going to have to choose sides, and whichever side you're going to choose, or if you're not choosing sides, you're choosing a side for various reasons of, again, constraints of sadly physical reality, where only one thing happens at a time, usually, and it's very hard. I think this is very hard. Where am I getting at all of this? I'm getting at all of this because that's why I like very much. This is my personal opinion. Well, opinion is a bad word, we're saying. Anyway, personal tendency is to not like shiluvim. How do you call them? Not like fusions. I don't like the people that are good, trying to be good at nikla and at nister. They're usually bad at both. And I very much like the people that heighten the, you know, you can't be both of course, sometimes you say you have to do both and so on. But it seems to me to carry more truth when you say, well, either you're going to be this or you're going to be that. And being this means trading off that. Maybe you're going to try, you know, gamizeh is always like the trick, but it's not really how it works. Anyways, therefore, to me, it's useful to say that thought is good at one thing and it's thinking. I don't want it to be good at anything else. And it seems to be bad at most other things. Well, does it have like some side effects that are good? Yeah, I'm sure it has some good side effects. And also, it's supposed to be the one good thing. That's another. The best good thing, which is supposed to be able to like manage everything else, and lead everything else, and you know, govern everything else. But that's already something that can only work if it's the one thing, right? Yeah.
Do you think that money also changes that? Not only like because the purpose, let's say the purpose is in the money sense, you're thinking to get, you get paid for thinking in a sense.
Who gets paid for thinking? Me?
People working in a biotech, I don't know. I'm saying people doing physics for money, people doing biology for money. Also, that also gives you another purpose to thinking.
And that's the discussion of Shlei Lishma, very serious discussion.
No, you were saying that Shlei Lishma, that's the whole point of here, that Shlei
That
Lishma,
is bad.
by definition, destroys the...
Yeah, it definitely does. What do you mean?
There's no Shlei Lishma, I mean, it has to be the only purpose.
Yeah, I was going against the good Shlei Lishma, the like Amanas Lasis, which is also a Shlei Lishma.
But I mean, obviously, anything else.
Yes, it definitely destroys thought. But I think this has been acknowledged in the time of Socrates again. You know, the people that take money for their lectures are probably optimizing for making money and not for finding out the truth. I mean, that's not probably, that's explicitly what they're doing. Now, you know, do you need some amount of money to survive and so on? All these are, again, practical problems, but yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. I find distinguishing the point as not having the correct opinions frees me from a lot of problems, because it seems to me very hard to have correct opinions on changing things, and maybe impossible. In other words, there might be a possibility of having less wrong opinions. Yeah, you could try to be less wrong, but it seems to be a lot of effort. At least it doesn't seem to be the thing that thought is good for. Seems to be that other things are better for that, and thought probably is a mismatch for that. And there's, there were kinds of rationality developed over the centuries for trying to live in that kind of world. And they don't seem to be working very well because they're like pretend reason, pretend thought. In other words, right? So for example, you say, how do we decide, how do we know anything under conditions of uncertainty, right? Or of too overcomplication, or of too many facts to keep track of, right? Or of most facts being inaccessible to you. You know, the craziest thing with people having opinions, especially about, stuff that they really don't know, is that and this is not even a philosophical point, right? The craziest thing that you absolutely have no clue what you're talking about. Like you've read propaganda, and if you're a smart guy, you've read 2 conflicting propagandas, so now you know 2 lies. 2 lies doesn't equal the truth. It might be one of the big things was like dialectic was supposed to be a way to getting from false to the truth. Like contradiction could show you what's wrong, but it doesn't show you much of truth. And you have to always assume that most of the reality is hidden from you. And they say, okay, so if I would have been the one reading all the intelligence reports over there in the wherever office, I'll know more of the truth. Well, you'll be getting someone else's version of the truth for whichever other reasons, and it's so complicated. And everyone has different words for why the other guy's side is lying, and it's true for everyone. And it just means that this business, again, if this business of trying to be an intellect, this is why I'm going back, trying to be an intellectual that knows the truth in a better way than anyone else seems to be a very losing proposition. Mostly because it's like, just dumb. It seems to be, and like you say, okay, maybe I'm bad at it. Maybe some people are good at maybe Nate Silver figured out how to read all the polls and get it right. Well, he didn't. And even if in the sense he did, it's just because he plays this silly game of I'm only telling you the percentages and that means nothing. So thank you very much. So what's the point? Right? It's just probabilities. So we invented this thing called probabilities, which it might be useful for something, but not for knowing.
Can I make an argument why it's important?
Yeah, sure.
Because, as you said, right, so you started off with the shadows, right? So the smart guy is going to predict the shadows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you have the guy who thinks he knows what he's predicting. And now he knows that the people are stupid, and they're going to suffer because they can't read the shadows. So I'm going to go try to convince everybody that the right opinion is new, so they don't suffer. So
yes.
Should that be a reason in itself to try?
I think that the people living in the world of the shadows need to be solved. I didn't say that we should we shouldn't just ignore them. And when this is a very big if, so that's one thing. I do think it's such a weird thing to be saying here. It does seem to be true that if the guy who is leading the shadow cave dwellers is wrong, like he thinks that this shadow it comes in the series and it's the other one, he doesn't understand the IQ test kind of things. He doesn't know after which shape is supposed to come next. Then, yeah, and that might make a difference, and people will die because of that or whatever. And someone does know it, you should obviously tell them, and you should obviously maybe you can have to say lies to convince them. All of that, yes, all of those are real things. All of those are real problems. That's the next step problem, but I think that the reality but number one, that is not by. Now there's 2 questions. There's 2 different questions, 2 different levels of questions, right? The first level is in the cave. The people in the cave, firstly, and for most things, and I find it extremely questionable for anything relevant to human life, that anyone in the cave knows anything more than anyone else. In other words, knows in the sense that has some kind of certainty or some kind of knowledge. People are more correct than others. Even that is very questionable to me, because most of the people that are more correct than others are just better at playing around with the variables so the Excel sheet comes out what they want it to come out most of the time. That's what the experts are supposed to be doing. And yes, you should generally do whatever your local doctor says, but it seems to be very questionable. Like I'm saying, do you really want to believe that, there's some things that maybe the most, in other words, anything that, I don't even know how to get into this problem, that many smarter people than me and more articulate people than me write about these kind of issues, and you could read them on the internet. and if it's shorter than like 7,000 words, don't read it, because that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But people have talked about these problems, and I don't know that anyone has like any way, again, in the knowledge way. In other words, let me say something like this, simplify what I'm saying. If you're a politician that needs to make decisions, if you're a householder that needs to make, like, I have to make decisions for where to live and what kind of mortgage to get and things like that, you have to make decisions. You have to have a method. Maybe there's a method if you make decisions, but being a smart guy is somewhat helpful in like very basic sense. So like I can read some forms and calculate what it means, and things like that, but not much beyond that. Knowing how to, read the P&L, or knowing how to read the variable percentage points and adding them up, that's a very valuable life skill. And everyone, in the sense, if it can be called like a reason skill, you should all use it. Many people are dumb and they think that, like the smaller thing is cheaper than the bigger thing or whatever, all these stupid tricks that they do to trick the dumb people, right? 99 cents is not really cheaper than $1 or whatever. Yeah, and to that extent, I agree. And if it's possible to teach people, and this was this whole discussion of biases and heuristics, and it turns out to be a big mess. But to some extent, it's true. There's all kind of people always trying to trick you, and there's all kind of basic innumeracy things and things like that that's helpful. But even for that, and when it comes to like the real decisions, it seems to not be very useful to be a smart guy, be an intellectual guy. Or at least it's most of the time the intellectual people spend their energy on things that should be, this is what I'm saying, because since my whole discussion, my whole question of life is, I have a certain amount of energy to spend, I have a very small budget, I have only like 3 hours a day. I know they're supposed to be 12 or 24 hours, but that's not true. And I can only spend it on a very limited amount of things. And most of the people that are trying to have the less wrong opinions about all these things of this world that we're talking about, I think are spending that time unwisely. Because the amount of effort they're putting into it doesn't equal the amount of gain they're getting out of it. And there are other things, such as thinking itself, for which you need very little information. You need a teacher probably, but you need very little information, which is more immediately a valuable way of using your time. In other words, if I have an hour and I could read an hour of lies about the economy, and maybe I'm smart enough to like synthesize it and figure out what it's actually saying and what the guy writing it didn't write because he doesn't want me to realize, or what he wrote in the end of the article, all these tricks. And that's what, then I'll have like what's called a more informed opinion, right? Or I could spend that hour reading philosophy, thinking. Forget about reading philosophy, that's a bad thing to say. Thinking, I should probably spend it thinking. That's all of my share boils down to, because when I make it bigger, it becomes too much. I tend to like try to sell too much. This is the basic thing, because that is something valuable in itself, and it's something that might lead you out of the cave. And now the thing is like this, like when I go back to, so that's the first level. The first level is that I find that especially the kind of power like abstract thinking and things like that are much less useful than pretended to be in the world of caves, in the world of shadows. They're useful if you want to convince someone, if you need to get a certain kind of job, you need to know how to make presentations and do all these games. So it's useful for that. Parnus is very important and so on. But if you're just a guy that wants to, like me, right? I'm not planning doing that job. You're just a guy that wants to be the guy with the corrector opinions, you shouldn't do it. Again, if you have a job, if you work for the newspaper or whatever, go ahead. But it seems to me, and then not only that, I would say that all the people that are doing this actually are doing that. Some of them are doing their job well. Like the guy that writes the smart opinion articles that I read, because I'm not gonna read the one that they wrote I read like the really complicated one, which has a lot of information and I like it. But in the end of the day, the goal of that person is not to tell me any truth. Well, that's for sure. But like the kind of work, the activity that he's doing is satisfying a certain job given to him by his, department head or whatever. Write a smart book about this. And he's good at it, so he writes it and I like it and I read it. but that's very limited relative to what I was really asking for, which is to find out the truth. Like, I don't want to be a stupid guy that just believes what he's told. I want to have some, smart understanding of this. And I don't really get that. I get the ability to speak about it more intelligently and sound smart and write papers and things like that. But I don't get any closer to anything used truth. And it's not even clear that there is a truth. Like we say, if you believe in the subject matter distinction, there isn't any truth in the end of this. It's all people playing with words all the way down. And therefore, so that's number one. And number two, out of that, number one is therefore the art of living well under conditions in the world of becoming, like Plato said, is not the art of knowledge. There's different things that you need to learn there. And sadly, the knowledge people are bad at it, mostly because they do not study the things that they need to study. In other words, there's not something, there's decision theory, Decision theory is the worst thing ever. Decisions means making decisions, not having theories. You shouldn't have a decision theory. You should just make decisions sometimes. Well, based on what? Whatever. You should do your best. But there's no algorithm for decisions, and there shouldn't be. If there is, then you're not doing it correctly. For example, or just there's different biases that people have and so on, but they're not the things that solve. Like I was going back talking about the basic practical decisions that you have to make. It's probably a waste of time to be smart about them, too smart, and it's probably more useful to do them. And like everyone knows, you learn more by doing, and it's a different kind of knowledge, you could call it even if you want, different kind of wisdom. There's a different aspect of to go back to the Aristotelian language, it's a different human activity, and there's human activity called making war, and that has nothing to do with the activity of having theories of war. Two different things. Very little to do. Maybe there's like a say, don't destroy the trees if you don't need them, and if you do, so thank you very much. It was totally useless, your whole share of Hilchis, because you just told me that if I need it, I shouldn't, and if I don't, I shouldn't. And I sort of knew that before. Also, so all this did was it pushed me 1 percentage point from it. Like it's shaila, ksas needing, ksas not. So then, okay, thank you very much, but much less useful than you pretend it is. So, and thirdly, that the real value of the people that crawled out of the cave to the people in the cave is not that they can predict the shadows better, is that they see that they're shadows. That's the Luzzato's Gana Mevucha image, right? Which is the classic Platonist image. Right? If you're in a maze, like a corn maze, where you can't, a human-sized maze, where you can't see your way out. So yes, you could, like the famous story of the guys in the maze or the forest where he meets another guy, like an old guy, and he tells him, finally we found a wise person. Said, I have no idea how to get out. I can tell you how not to get out because I tried a bunch of ways that don't work. That's most of the wisdom of old people is like that. But if there's someone that has like a helicopter that he's standing on top of the thing and he tells you, just go there, that's much more useful. So that's the kind of knowledge that the people outside of the cave, if you can get out, the thing you're supposed to try to get to the people in is not the correct predictions of the... In other words, you shouldn't be making predictions based on the real... So this is why the ideal science of Plato and Aristotle wasn't to make predictions based on evidence. It was to know the causes and know, right? If you're standing outside and you see the guy moving the thing, you can just say, I see the guy moving, so he'll have a shadow. I don't need to figure out what move, because the shadows don't actually decide themselves. There's something that decides them. And it's the guy outside moving them around, or maybe there's some logic moving him, which is really what you're trying to get at, and so on. So that's the third thing. And does this solve? Is this practical? Did it ever happen? Yeah, this is Alfred Abi's theory of prophecy, and this is his theory of the Torah. This is the Rambam's theory of the Torah. And supposedly, the theory was that the way of the Torah was trying to not to teach people only how the shadows work and how to get saved from the bad shadows and find the good ones. It was at least something sourced outside of it. And the same for all the things that we're talking about. Yeah. So therefore, if you want, it's like this. Halacha l'mas, it comes out like this. But if you want to spend your time to be a smart person, which is why we came here, you should learn Shulchan Aruch, or whatever, or Rambam, or Chaim Briska. And if you want to be a smart kid, also knows who to vote for. So it's like enough to like find out, think for 5 minutes about that. And make a decision. And if you're wrong, you say, okay, I made the wrong decision. It's very hard to be wrong anyways, because nobody knows the truth. Something like that. You should try. Yeah.
No one's gonna be right. You gotta. If you're in the maze, you're not gonna try not to get out.
Yeah, you should try to get out. But maybe if there's like a way to like get a whole, like if there's 2 ways of getting out. This is not a practical. If there's 2 ways of getting out, and one is like just trying all the ways of doing that, and another one is like maybe there's a ladder that you could get into a vantage point where you could see the whole thing. It's probably more worth spending your efforts in that direction. And by the way, this is also true. This is not very helpful for opinions, but it is help if there's some level of thought. And I say, we distinguish this world of thought and world of opinions very sharply. But there's still, if you want something even more practical, there is still many different levels of it. In other words, they're not very helpful, but I feel more smart thinking those thoughts than the other ones. In other words, do you want to count how many dollars each side has, or how many bombs everyone has, and where they are exactly? And a bunch of smart people that I know have been figuring out in the last few days is how many, if that hospital is a base or not, and like what is the din like. And this seems like such nonsense, because like arguing over things that you don't know and have any way of knowing, and also like makes no difference. So at least this ability to say that this makes no difference seems to be valuable. And that's not something that comes from having smart opinions. It comes from usually knowing that things have causes, and maybe this is not useful because it doesn't help you decide things. If you're let's say, at least trying to focus on a principle that's maybe not overarching but relevant. Like, I feel like someone who maybe spends a little bit of time thinking about these things can tell you that the number of people that got killed, although a tragedy, might not necessarily have moral significance or moral weight, and then we should be looking at other factors. Yeah, yes.
I think that's an advantage of having maybe a more philosophical mindset.
Because it's closer, but the problem is that it's closer to thought. A little bit closer. That's what I was saying with the levels. A little bit closer. A little bit closer to thought. And also, it's only true if you're some kind of a Platonist. If you're a consequentialist, which most people nowadays are supposed to pretend to be, then it does make a big difference what the number is. If you're Sam Harris, whose morality is based on numbers supposedly, then it should make a big difference. Right? This only works if there is such a thing as principles, which is a metaphysical thing.
Right, but that's an advocation for why you should even do politics philosophically, unlike maybe what was implied earlier.
Yeah, but what is philosophical politics?
Philosophical politics is exactly this: seeing past, let's say, a number, and then focusing on maybe more on let's say, I don't know what kind of ethical hierarchy you want to construct between ways of analyzing.
So that's true again. I'm worried that we might be playing with opinions again, because if I am I never gave all my drushas here about Chachma Segedel Meribbe Memasav. It's a big problem, because what is our question? What are we actually trying to know? What are we doing? You asking me if I should? Do I have any? Are you asking me? In other words, I don't believe in support or thoughts and prayers. Are you asking me if I should walk into that hospital of what big size bomb I should drop on it? Is that the question that we're deciding? It doesn't seem like, because I didn't get the call to decide that. So it doesn't look like I'm deciding that. Whoever is deciding that should have some way of figuring it out. should decide it somehow.
One second. That person who's trying to figure it out should decide on the basis of which principle.
I don't
It's a
think
choice whether or
no.
not to do it, right? And that
But the
choice
problem is the baya is
informed by
yes, but no. But the baya is that person deciding it is going to be stuck in your little world that you're not trying to get away from, because for him it definitely makes a difference what the number is, whether for practical reasons or for moral reasons or for philosophical reasons, whatever reasons.
Exactly the question.
It's going to.
Reasons should be.
It doesn't matter for whatever the guy is making. This is the thing, very important. Guys, people making decisions never makes them for philosophical reasons. Sadly. Because the world isn't simple enough for that. The one in which I'm acting.
Right, I agree. Right,
Right?
yeah, and I'm not saying.
And the people that pretend to make it simple.
Yeah, you might only end up being
don't.
less wrong.
No, not even. I
No,
mean,
think you will end up being less wrong.
in some extremely basic sense.
Or
In
you'll-
other
or
words,
you'll at least have a better chance. You'll have a higher
in
chance
some
of
in
being
some
less
like
wrong.
deeply basic sense, which in
You'll have
other
a higher
words,
chance of being less wrong.
yes,
You-
like less wrong in the sense of like if there's a question like
I mean, that-
what okay so yeah in the level of something like this, like what degree should I set my my air control or whatever my climate control in my house. So there's a lot of different arguments for why it should be this number or the other, both practical and philosophical and moral and halacha, who knows what. But it's probably good to know that it should be something like over 50 degrees and less than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Right? You agree? That's the amount, that's like a principle. Actually, it's not a principle, that's just uncomfortable. It should be less, it should for sure, if you want to be a philosopher, it should for sure be like above the degree at which people freeze to death with coats, and below the one which they burn to death, I don't know, with fans or whatever. With drinking a lot of lemonade. That's the constraint that the pure logic gets me to. Or something closer to pure principle gets me to. Everything in between that, the question of comfort and the question of trade-offs and the question of how much money I have and maybe am I more trying to save money or the environment or who knows what.
I think that
It
it's a two-way axis, meaning it becomes clearer and less clear depending on circumstance, and becomes clearer or less clear depending on the application of thought, right? So a very simple moral, let's say, problem: should a random person go into a school and murder the children?
Right.
It's something that you don't need to be a philosopher to know is wrong. And an issue, let's say, like a complicated war between countries, is something that being a philosopher might not be very good at.
No, exactly. It doesn't seem to be help at all. So where does it help?
I think that there is a middle where there are enough moving moral there is enough moral confusion that you can't, that having.
I'm not sure that I believe in that. Not sure.
Help you. I agree. Usually those situations are very confused and they rely too much on facts and too little on.
I'm not sure I believe in that. That's the thing.
I'm not sure I do either, but I'm not sure I don't.
Like, I don't have any good examples of that happening.
I mean, I think modern examples fall under this. Again, they may be failing context, but if you have someone's coming after you to kill you, and those are trolley problems for fun. Right.
They're not real problems.
Yeah, but I don't know if trolley problems for fun. I don't know if there's never any trolleys.
There's many trolleys, and since like all the infinite variations of the trolley problems show, since the halacha l'maaseh depends on like it says in all the halachas farm.
Right.
Don't pass him from this because the slightest change makes a difference. Exactly, and therefore you can't even pass him for what the Rav said 5 minutes ago because it's 5 minutes later. So therefore you have to just decide things by yourself, and learning how to decide things for yourself is a very valuable life skill. And
is it a skill?
I think it's a skill. No, that's a skill. I think that's the skill that we should learn also. I don't know if it's rooted, but it's a skill. Maybe the question, maybe the being rooted, maybe the looking for the rootedness is the problem.
Not even skill. What's the what?
It's a skill in the sense of like an activity that you can do better or worse. People are worse at it and better than it. Many people, are yeah, of course.
And we determine that how?
By them doing the thing better.
Well, like going to AC and winning more money.
No, not winning more money. Winning money is not about that skill.
Well, he decided to
There's
go.
a skill of decision making.
Skill of making the decision to go to Atlantic City.
No. That's about how good you are at gambling and other things.
That's afterwards.
That's true.
Yeah,
If you're playing slot.
because now you're putting it, you're again subjugating it to something else, like how much money you made. That's a skill of making money, like famously.
Stands on its own.
You say the person who can make it.
Again, just like you can, one second, just like you can be a good
decides the quickest? Yeah.
Just like you can be a good or a bad carpenter without the question of which carpenter makes more money, which is a separate question. That's a question of the art of money making, not of the art of being good cheer.
If you make good things of carpentry.
And how to decide if they're good things of carpentry? Because they conform to the ideal of carpentry, right?
Okay.
Very good. That if their chairs are good as chairs and good as beautiful objects and so on.
Conforms to the ideal form of power.
And good decision makers are the people whose decisions conform to the ideal of decision making. That's a very nice tautology. But that's the thing. There's such a thing.
I think that's circular.
And it's circular. Of course, it's circular. No, I can give you
this.
this.
It's not only circular. It's a very small circle.
Yeah, good small circles are where we get closer
No,
to getting to getting definitions.
Problems with large radiuses. My problem is when they get too small.
No, it's very good. So now, for example, I can give you the examples of the bad ones. This is a whole. For example, someone who hesitates the wrong amount. All things have to be like this. I know people who have a problem with making decisions. I know them personally,
90%.
like me. No, sometimes, on some days. And the problem is not that the wrong ones. That would be a different problem. Having the wrong decisions made, and we understand that problem easily. That's a problem that we all understand one. But the problem is that many times, for example, that person, since he has not been taught the art of making decisions, and it's an art of being taught, that's my contention, or you probably learn it by seeing other people doing it and copying them, it's like most other human skills. But since it's bad at that, many times I just don't make the decision. And then whatever happens, happens. And that is assuming, maybe there's some cases in which that is the correct decision, but assuming that it seems to be too much. Everything is a question of too much and too little. Again,
failed decision making.
Exactly. And even if there was a good, you could always say, maybe there's a correct amount of decision making. I'm not saying, maybe there's a correct amount of decision making. Maybe you shouldn't always make a decision. But sometimes it's actually your job to make the decision. That's an easy case, right? Sometimes it's actually, someone gave you that job, right? And you just failed at your job, right? You didn't do your duty. You're the, whatever, I have a lot of examples, right? If you're the boss of the company, you've got to make a decision how many vacation days to give your employees. And if you don't make the decision, it reverts to whatever the state of New Jersey says, which is 0. And that's not a good state. I think they changed it last week or whatever. Whatever, for example. So you should make a decision. Well, this is going to be too much, or you do another evil thing, which is like you say, we have unlimited vacation days. And now you let everyone else make the decision. And that's called not a good decision-making person. Why? Because if you're the boss, your job is to make that decision. And if you pass it on to above you to the state or below you to the employees, you're not doing your job. Very simple. Now and why didn't you do it? Well, because you didn't have all the information of all the studies of what that does to the productivity or whatever nonsense the consultants will tell you. No, it's because you just don't know how to do decisions. That's all. How to make them. And how do you make them? I don't know, like everything else, you practice. Practice with small things. You practice. And doesn't it have a reason? I'm not sure that decisions have to have a reason. Or maybe according to the determinists, they have to have a reason, but who cares about that? In reality, looking for reasons is probably not the same thing as making decisions. And that's why philosophy, which is looking for reasons, philosophers are not usually good at making decisions, at least the ones that are not, have this separate skill. And that doesn't seem to be a good thing. In other words, it seems to be, you can say, well, if I would have been a better philosopher, a better thinker, I would have been better at this. No, maybe it's just two different things. Maybe these are not the same things. Maybe this is just a separate skill. And it's has like a separate realm of being it refers to. In the human world, you've got to make decisions. And there's different, I could give you I can't really get very close to defining that, because defining that I could say not too many, don't make too little decisions, don't make too few decisions, don't make too many decisions, don't be rash. And also I could say things like, don't make obviously dumb ones. I mean, these are important. All kinds of very simple stuff, but just do it. Figure out how to do it. And also, don't think that knowing will help you. That's the mistake that I'm getting at now. Don't think that knowing more stuff will help you much, because it won't.
Okay, I agree.
Sorry to inform you. Sorry to
No, I agree.
I know too much.
No, I think that
No, it's just, I didn't say it's not good. It's not good for the purpose of making decisions. It's good for the purpose of knowing. That's my whole thing. And that's why, if you believe, which we believe in this room, in this house, we believe that knowing is good for its own sake. I'm going to make such a sign. In this house, we believe knowing is good for its own sake.
That I'm with.
Therefore, you should not try to say that it's also good for making decisions. And if you find yourself deficient in making decisions, you should go to the decision-making school, and not to the knowledge school.
Right. No, but that's not right.
Which is not a school, because it's not a knowledge. It's a practice.
No, and that's not the point, obviously. The point of knowing is not so you can decide well. You don't even know what to decide if you don't know anything. But I don't think that they don't inform each other at all.
Everything informs each other, but the question is, maybe too marginally.
Separation, I wonder, I guess I don't know if it's as large as...
In other words, I'm sure there are some correct numbers to be known.
Right.
It's not like and being a philosopher and saying the numbers are less important. I find, again, the people that I know, that I read, they consider themselves to be thinkers of some sort, that have the correct solutions for all kinds of problems, seem to me to be extremely dumb. Not dumb as philosopher thinkers. They're good thinkers. When they give a shir and a kama, they see to the zach. When he says what the whatever should do, he's just saying whatever my neighbor could think of, and nothing. And the only male, like you're saying, he seems to be better because he has this clarity, simplicity. He's cutting through a lot of things. But that seems to be wrong, because he shouldn't be cutting through a lot of things. Again, to the extent that the question is what I should be saying in Lakewood, the answer is I shouldn't be saying nothing. Like, who asked you? If you should be saying the most general things, yes, the most general things might be valuable. Don't kill innocent humans. And do kill ones that are trying to kill you. That's so basic, everyone agrees with it. Besides for the ones that are the ones that wanted to kill you, that's a very good, by the way, very good, very simple. Don't get confused. Murder is bad, and self-defense is a good excuse, or it's actually not even called murder. Very good. And if the guy that's trying to kill you says that murder is bad, and it's just confusing you. Don't be confused. Thank you very much. That everyone in the world agrees with, theoretically at least. Again, besides for the guy who's like gaslighting you. Everyone agrees with that. But is this specific guy gaslighting you? And is this specific case what we're talking about? For that, all of this, and the people that pretend to be cutting through the irrelevant numbers with that are not helping. Never helps. And and again, going back to the religious kind of cases, which I know better, all they end up being is like this weird fundamentalists. We're going to ignore the reality. And I'm not disagreeing with your principles, even. Maybe I am, but that's a different discussion. I just don't think that they're adequate for decision making ever. And what they do, and what most smart people end up doing, and we see this all the time, is like taking certain principles which are sometimes true ones and sometimes false ones, and just pretending that the rest of the world doesn't exist. And I think this is part of this too quick connection of Chachma and Masa. Too quick. There must be, I must believe that there's some intermediate principles. I didn't say there's no intermediate principles. Last week we did this whole thing that there must be halacha, which are intermediate principles basically. Maybe there are intermediate principles. But I actually don't think that they're as helpful as people pretend that they are. Mamish don't think so.
Maybe not. I don't know if they're as unhelpful.
And if they are, they're not principle. They're more something like midas. More something like, I don't know the answer to this. I just haven't found anyone that's actually, or there's like a meta principle, which is like, in reality, the way these kind of systems with laws for these things work, is that the principle turns into you have to ask a Rav. It's very different from having a principle that actually tells anyone what to do. That's a different kind of principle. I actually agree with that principle, but I just don't know if the Rav is the guy you should ask. Maybe you should ask someone. That would be a nice idea. But it doesn't translate into anything, and what's the Rav going to do? So he's going to make the decision for you. Then it's just bad decision making. That's a different problem. So he's going to have some kind of insight. Like I said, it always might be good to ask other people and so on. But it doesn't seem to solve the problem that we're having. Unless you have this kind of a bubble where there's no real question of what decision to make, right? You should ask your Rav how to keep Shabbos to the extent that has no relevance to the real world. Like in this house we keep Shabbos, and keep Shabbos means, now we could argue what keep Shabbos means, but in this house it means doing whatever the Mishnah Berurah says. So thank you very much. That just solved it by definition. And maybe that's a thing you should do, but it doesn't solve it whenever you move out of this house. I asked Okoi, so does that mean that therefore I shouldn't say hello to my neighbor who doesn't keep Shabbos? Some people would say yes, that's what it means. And it's not really because he thought of that question, it's just because he ignored the question. Very different situation. And the same thing for all these other cases which we know about. So I don't know. I really would want there to be something like this. In other words, something that I could be good at, that could solve actual problems. And I'm worried that the thing that I'm not good at, which is making decisions, is the thing that's needed. And based on information, obviously, nobody's saying otherwise. But based on principles, hard to say. Based on like the greatest principles of like the ones that everyone agrees with. Yeah, maybe there's some greatest principle that everyone agrees with. That will be interesting. But that's interesting as philosophy itself, not only as like what to do. Anyways, Shine. Hope nobody knows anything after this discussion. Because that was our goal. No less things. I'm going to make a new website. It's going to be called No Less.
No less. Less wrong, right? As opposed to less wrong.
Yeah, less wrong is about opinions.
That's the idea. Less wrong is the opinions.
Well, I just said that.
Yeah, I don't think the site is valid.
Well, it's based on probabilistic thinking, which is trying to solve that problem, yes.
Yeah, it's about trying to solve opinion things.
Yeah, definitely. They don't believe in philosophy over there.
Not sure what they believe in.
I'm telling you.